to start by removing the wheel 21mm socket. Remove all 5 of your lug nuts. And remove the wheel. 14mm socket, remove both of these bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. Leave that one in a few threads and undo the bottom. All right, now you can remove the top fully. Unthread them, slide them out. These are also your slider pins, so set them aside, and remember that the top one that goes in here had this rubber piece. Now you can take a little pry bar and just pry the caliper right off. Set it aside safely so it's not putting any pressure on this brake hose. I like to just put it right up here on the knuckle right around the strut. It's perfect. Now remove your brake pads. And now we can remove these two 17mm bolts that hold the bracket onto the knuckle. There's one. I'm going to leave this in just a few threads and remove the top one. All right, now you can fully remove the bottom one as well. And remove your caliper bracket from the knuckle. Now remove your rotor. Sometimes it gets seized and stuck on here. If that's the case, just hammer in the middle of these studs and hopefully that breaks it free. Or you can use two 8x125 bolts and thread them into these holes, and that'll push the rotor off the hub. Whatever works for you. For me, it comes right off. If you still have your old hub here, which most likely you do, you want to clean it off and make sure there's no rust buildup, debris or chunks, whatever might be stuck on here. Take all that off, sand it, use a wire brush, whatever you have to do, but make sure it's nice and flat so the new rotor can sit flush. And then I like to apply a thin coat of anti-seize to the hub surface. That way the rotor doesn't rust onto the hub in the future and it doesn't get all built up with debris. So now that that's done, grab your new rotor and put it on backwards so that you can clean off this outer surface as well as where the e-brake shoe goes. So use some brake parts cleaner, spray it down and wipe it. It's coated from the factory with oil so that it doesn't rust on the shelf. And of course do the same in here, otherwise your parking brake shoes will not have any grip. Now install the rotor the right way, press it on, and let's clean off the outer surface. Make sure you get all the oils off of this. You don't want anything contaminating your brake pads. And wipe this area off too. Now if your old rotor had a little plug, a rubber plug here, you want to transfer it over to the new rotor. Mine didn't, so I have nothing to put here, but don't forget that. This is where you can adjust your parking brake shoes without taking the rotor off, so you can feel the drag of the shoes, and if you leave it open, water's going to get in. And speaking of parking brake shoe adjustment, so down here at the bottom of your e-brake shoes, you'll see this adjuster. You can either spin it one way or the other to either expand or retract the shoes. Clearly my shoes are, well, missing some material here, so that's going to be another problem for another time for me, but this is how you would adjust them. And you want to adjust them so that when you put the rotor on, it has minimal drag, so you can hear them drag a little bit, but you don't want them to actually stop the rotor from spinning, obviously. You just want a little bit of noise from them, and that's all. Now take your old caliper bracket, remove the anti-rattle clips. Might need a little screwdriver or pry bar to get those off. Set them aside, and you want to clean this surface here. Mine is not too bad, too badly rusted, so a wire brush will do the trick. But sometimes they get really rotted and you need to actually sand it down with a sanding disc of some sort, in which case do that. If you don't, then your pads aren't going to be able to seat fully. They'll be compressed, squeezed between the two ends, and then if you go to release the brakes, well, the pads won't release. So then you'll have braking issues. So just sand it down, wire brush it, do whatever you have to do. Get it nice and clean. Take a thin layer of grease and apply it to this area so that it'll prevent rust from building up in the future. And you don't want too much, because then once you put the new anti-rattle clip on, it'll actually squeeze and get onto the rotor. So you just want a nice thin layer like that. Grab the new one, press it on, and make sure it snaps into place and locks in. You don't want this accidentally falling off or anything. There we go. Press it down all the way, and we'll do the same to this side. All right, that's done on both sides. The next thing I want to do is add a little bit of grease to the inside of these boots. Now, my slider pins were not rusted or stuck in there or anything. They're still very well lubricated. If they were stuck and rusty, I'd take a bore brush and clean out the inside of this hole so that there's no more rust and debris in there. But like I said, mine's good, so I'm just going to apply some grease to the inside of the boot. The reason I'm doing this is because if I put it on the slider, it's all going to wipe off as I try to put the slider in, and putting it in here will keep the grease inside. Just work it into the little folds of the boot here. And I'll put a little bit on the slider when it comes time to install it, but more than just a very thin layer will basically just get wiped off by the rubber here. So, all right, that's good like that. Now take your slider pins, and because these are also the caliper mounting bolts at the same time, I won't be installing these until last, so wipe these off, make sure the old grease and any debris that's on them comes off. Remember that one had the little rubber boot. If yours are for some reason rusted and they need to be cleaned up, go ahead and do so with a wire wheel or wire brush, whatever you have. Make sure this lip right here is clean, because this is where this boot seals up, and if it's not clean, water can get in, and then you'll get rusty caliper slider pins. So this is clean. This is clean and lubricated, so wipe off any excess grease that might be hanging out here, and let's get this on the vehicle. Slide the caliper bracket on, line it up with the bolt holes on the back, and start in your two 17mm bolts. Start in the other one too. Let's bottom this out. Let's tighten these up, and then we'll torque them to 58 foot-pounds. All right, let's install the new pads now. You have to find the right angle, because these little spring clips here want to push them out, which is their job, but makes it a little difficult for installation. There we go. Once you find the right angle, it should just slide right in. And another important thing to note is if they don't move around like this, if they're stuck in place, that means you didn't clean off these areas well enough. Like I mentioned earlier, the pads are being squished together, so once they get compressed onto the rotor, they'll never release. Now use your caliper depression tool. You can also use a big set of pliers or a C-clamp or whatever you have, and just squeeze the piston in very slowly. That's going to allow the new pads to be able to slide into this caliper. Okay, remove your tool. Now you want to take a little bit of grease and just apply it to these two ears, as well as to this inner or outer ring of the caliper piston. Now you can slide your caliper right over the pads. Make sure the boots don't get pinched there or ripped off or anything. And now let's get the two slider bolts in. Now let's put in our slider pins. The one with the rubber bushing or sleeve went on the top. There we go. That one slides right in. There we go. This one also slides right in. Snug them up and then torque these to 32 foot-pounds. Okay, 32 foot-pounds. Perfect. Now let's get the wheel on. Let's get the wheel installed. Put all 5 of your lug nuts on, bottom them out, and then we'll torque them to 76 foot-pounds. Ooh.